Come on. Seriously. Hey everyone, Calvin here. Welcome back to Everyday Backpacker. That entirely gratuitous and unnecessary coffee scene in the beginning was done solely because my friend and subscriber, Chris, was very displeased by my old grinder, so he decided he needed to send me a new one. So out of appreciation, I decided I'd go ahead and feature it. Thanks, Chris, and the coffee's great. Today we're going to continue our planning series with a very important but often overlooked subject, which is emergency planning. We're going to talk a little bit about why it's often overlooked. And to give you a little bit of understanding about where I come from on this subject, I'm going to show you a piece of gear that I used to use for 10 years. I don't use anymore, but it's really a big important part of my understanding of emergency, and that is my old fire helmet. See, I spent 10 years as a firefighter paramedic. So obviously I'm pretty ingrained in the idea of emergency services. And so part of that is I do spend a little bit more time focusing on emergencies. This is a subject that is kind of an oddity in the planning area because some people are really into it and other people, their idea of emergency planning is just making sure that they packed the first aid kit. Oh yeah, emergency planning done. Time for a beer. Now I could say that others go way overboard, but the reality is that in my opinion there really isn't such a thing as too much planning when it comes to emergencies. So why is it that some people are less inclined to do emergency planning? A lot of it has to do with experience. In the backcountry, it's been my observation, both as emergency services and as a backpacker, that there are two main areas that get people in trouble in the backcountry. One is a lack of experience, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you don't know what you're doing, you're more likely to get into trouble. And the other one is over-reliance on experience. And that one's a little bit harder to understand. So over-reliance on experience comes into play when we've been out on many successful backpacking trips and we kind of got a feeling of things are going to go a certain way. Now, to be honest, backpacking is probably one of the statistically most safe activities you can do in the backcountry. Chances are most trips are going to go without a hitch. But unfortunately, all it takes is one little accident to totally change that trip.
Here comes another one of those idiot hikers. Welcome to Montana, loser.
Where in the hell did that come from?
I am 100% convinced that's exactly how it happens, and you will not convince me otherwise. And it really can be that easy. But if we've done a whole bunch of trips where nothing bad has happened, our mind kind of programs itself to believe that that's how it's always going to go. And it's really easy to find yourself in a situation that isn't working out well, that you're not well prepared for, because you weren't expecting it. This actually happened to me once in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I was a paramedic. I was a seasoned backpacker. I thought I knew everything. I ended up getting heat exhaustion, and I ended up having to be evacuated from the park. Really humbling experience. But it can happen to just about anyone. So a little bit of planning can go a long way in making sure that our experience is a great one.
Well, as much fun as I have filming in the apartment, it is way too gorgeous in Montana right now to film there. So my friend Connor and I decided that we would take this show on the road, well, trail, and continue the lesson while we're out here hiking. So the first part of a really decent emergency plan is to write things down. Actually is to plan out an evac plan. So this isn't as big a deal for a short trip or an area that's pretty heavy populated. So you're not necessarily gonna need this for an overnight, but if you're going out for a few days, It's really important to know the possible places that you can go out to get help the quickest while you're out on the trail. So, for instance, for the big trip that we're planning this summer, we are going to be on a loop, and that loop has quite a few spokes that come in from other trailheads. So we're actually never going to be more than probably about half a day's hike to a trailhead. So that particular route has some really good options for evac planning. But in the event that something happens and somebody is unable to walk on their own, it's kind of important to have a general idea of your surroundings and know a way to find help quicker for that person. So the next thing that you want to check before you head out is the weather. So you're going to encounter two types of issues in the backcountry that can create hazards. One of them is objective, which in this case would be weather or terrain or something like that. And the other is subjective, which is human-made, which can be caused by objective hazards. So for instance, if you go out in the weather and you're not well prepared, you may end up with hypothermia. So it's important as part of the planning process to have an idea of what the weather is going to do, especially out here in Montana in the mountains, because the weather can be pretty unpredictable. So you want to have a general idea of what it's going to be like, because of course forecasts are never 100% accurate. But having an idea of what the weather conditions are going to be like before you go, if there's any chances of rain, what the temperatures are going to be like, you can plan accordingly. Now in a desert climate, you don't have to carry as much gear because the temperatures and the weather are pretty consistent. But oftentimes up in the mountains, we have to make sure that we have everything kind of covered. So sometimes you have to bring a little bit of extra gear, but you do want to plan to bring weather gear for multiple types of weather conditions, be it rain, hail, in this case sometimes snow even in the summer, and then temperature ranges. Even though it may be 80 degrees in the daytime, oftentimes it can still get down in the 20s up here. So it's pretty rare that I'm up in the mountains and I'm not bringing at least a puffy. There's lots of places that you can obviously check the weather. The easiest one's going to be weather.com or weather.gov, which is the National Weather Service's website. There's also several other options out there that are more directed towards hiking and climbing. I think there's summitweather.com or something like that. I'm obviously not very well prepared for this segment, but there are definitely lots of sources out there to get as close of a weather forecast as you can. So another important part of the planning is to make sure that you have some pretty good basic navigation stuff along with you. Now, of course, your cell phone is a great tool. There's a lot of apps out there that you can use for navigation, like Gaia, Earthmate, and things like that. But like any other electronic tool, you don't want to rely solely upon that, because batteries can fail, and if it fails and you're relying on it for your navigation, you could be in a lot of trouble. So it's important to bring along map and compass in order, and also know how to utilize them, because they aren't going to fail you and they're going to work the entire time. And so having a good prior knowledge of where you're going on the map is also going to help you stay found, as well as help you find your way out in a situation, and help you find your evac plans. Another option that you have as far as a tool in the backcountry would be some sort of a communication device, like a satellite communicator. In this case, this is the inReach Mini. And this is another tool that can be utilized to increase your safety margin. So obviously I have the SOS capability. I have the ability to, as well, to be able to communicate with my emergency contacts back home, to let them know if maybe we're just delayed so they don't have to send out the cavalry, or that, you know, the situation has changed and that kind of thing. Again though, it is a tool, and you don't want to fall into the danger of using it as a crutch. There have been people out there who have taken greater risk because they have one of these devices, thinking that it increases their safety margin. And although it does, it's not an excuse to necessarily do something you wouldn't normally do to go against a prudent decision. But again, this can be something that can be a part of your emergency plan. And in my case, I take it with me on pretty much any trip because, again, it's just an added safety margin because most of the areas we're in don't have any way of communication. And when you're dealing with a grizzly country, it's really important to have something like this with you. Now, the best way to mitigate an emergency situation is really to avoid the situation altogether. So it's important for us going out in the backcountry to have really decently developed skills. So one way that you can really help avoid an emergency situation is constantly brushing up on your backcountry skills and maybe doing something like taking a first aid class or a wilderness first responder class. These can be very beneficial in your knowledge in keeping you from getting into an emergency situation, so it counts as part of your emergency planning. However, again, you don't want to fall into the pitfall of having too much reliance on your skills that causes you to get a little bit lackadaisical. For instance, I was a paramedic and I still managed to be evacuated with heat exhaustion. So skills should be tools, but not overly relied upon. Yes, it's a really good idea to leave some sort of trip itinerary or contact information with a trusted person back home who can activate anything in the unlikely chance that you don't make it back. There are a lot of templates that you can get online with this information, and the amount of information you put on it can vary depending on the trip length. Obviously, for a shorter trip like an overnighter, I don't really give out a lot of information. I may just send a text message to my friend saying, hey man, I'm going for an overnight, here's where I'll be at, I should be off the trail by this point, I'll contact you when I get off. If you don't hear from me after such and such time, let somebody know. Or for a longer trip, you can get even more detailed and put information like your participant's name, phone number, address, their emergency contact, medical conditions and allergies, and their experience level. This is all important information that can help rescuers know what they might be getting into. And then of course the other information you would want to include would be the trip info. So the destination, maybe the address associated with it, such as a ranger station or something to that effect, and your travel info, the make, model, and plate number of the vehicle that you're going to be in, if they need to locate that, and your departure time and return time, both the earliest that you'll get back or the latest that you'll get back, and instructions on what to do if you don't make it back during those time periods. And then of course, information for who they should contact in case there is an emergency. So local police, ranger district, things like that, the people who might go out and look for your sorry butt. And then of course, an itinerary, a rough idea of where you're going to be camping and staying each night. These are things that are going to give a possible search team the tools that they would need to be able to locate you. Again, it's not information you have to do every time. Nobody will fault you if you do it every time. But if you're going out for a longer trip, leaving that information behind in the unlikely event that you run into a situation can be helpful. Those are just a few tips and strategies that you can do to hopefully avoid or deal with an emergency situation if it comes up. Because no matter how many miles you put down, there's still always an opportunity that something unexpected is going to happen. And a little bit of planning can make a minor inconvenience out of something that otherwise could be a pretty big issue. What are some tips you might have or things that you do to do an emergency plan? Leave those comments below. And the next installment, we'll be talking about actually getting out and hitting the trail. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep hiking on.